welcome to episode 41 of Weighing In with Andy Hamilton and David Mirikitani. I'm Andy Hamilton, coming to you from the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum in Waterloo, Iowa. Joined on the phone by David Mirikitani, coming to you from the suburbs of St. Louis. Welcome back, David. How's everything today?
Everything is good. Just getting the week wrapped up before we head out to Lincoln.
Yeah, exciting stuff on the way this week. World Team Trials, Schoolboy Duels, Pan Am Juniors, lots of stuff happening this week. A couple Division I programs on the move in terms of conferences. A couple high-profile wrestlers on the move in terms of transfers. We got a couple weight classes we're going to look at. David, where do you want to kick this thing off this week?
Wherever you want, wherever you think it makes sense to start.
Well, you mentioned World Team Trials at the top. It's the stuff that everybody's going to have their eye on this weekend out in Lincoln. UWW Junior World Team Trials as well on Friday. Senior World Team Trials on Saturday. Some highly anticipated matchups coming down the pipe in both of them. David, what is the most exciting thing on the plate this week for you? What are you looking forward to most?
I think, and no disrespect to anybody else that's in these weight classes, but I think it's super intriguing to see David Taylor, probably get to wrestle Jaden Cox. And, the series that keeps on going, Kyle Dake, Jordan Burroughs. And I feel like if Burroughs wins that, there's a good chance that Dake moves up if they do have those new weight classes to like that 80-kilo weight class to get on a world team. And I think if he doesn't, you might see a Dieringer or some of those other guys that, you're going to see a lot of movement, I think, when they change these weight classes, but that primarily. And I think it's super interesting to think that not that long ago, David Taylor was a 157-pounder or 149-pounder, I guess, when he wrestled Bubba Jenkins. And now, Cox was a 220-pounder and a heavyweight in high school, even though obviously he didn't weigh that much. It's just interesting to see those guys. It's sort of hard to anticipate those guys would end up wrestling each other. Again, obviously the same thing could probably be said for, it'd be hard to imagine that Kyle Dake would end up wrestling Jaden Cox in the Olympic trial finals too. So I think those are two, super interesting stories. And then I think that 66-kilo weight class in the Junior World Team Trials is going to be absolutely bonkers mayhem, right?
Yeah, yep. Well, let's rewind to Taylor and Cox. And obviously David Taylor's got some work to do to get to that point. But that being said, he's on a serious tear this year. I'm not sure if in the history of the World Cup anybody's ever had a better World Cup than the one David Taylor had this year, 4-0. A couple wins over Olympic gold medalists, dominant performance start to finish. Once he got over the hump in that match against Yazdani Tiradi, he really poured it on. He wore out a lot of guys out there with just, peppering them with leg attacks and just looks like a totally different guy this year. So high pace, high powered offense from David Taylor. And then you look on the other side of the coin, Jaden Cox did not allow a takedown at the Olympics in 4 matches. Pretty fascinating stuff. If we get a best of 3 there, how would you see that one shaping up?
Well, it's really interesting, right? Because they're both, so special and have been were very dominant in college as well. I know Jaden a little better just because, he's a Missouri guy and I recruited his older brother. And his learning curve, he obviously was a superstar in high school and him and Snyder would go back and forth at Fargo. But he didn't really wrestle a lot of freestyle in the off season in college. And then when he tried out for the went out for the Olympic trials, we had one of those pools and everybody's kind of picking guys. And I picked him because he was the only guy at that weight class that was cutting to make the weight. And because you've seen a lot of success recently, guys that came right out of a college season and do really well at that senior level and at the Olympic level. So It's interesting. I'm also friends with a buddy of mine who's his nutritionist is the one that's worked with David Taylor and helping him get big functionally. So on paper, it seems like Jaden Cox would have a size advantage and maybe a speed and flexibility advantage. Jaden is also a complete freak to finish on when you get to his legs. So if Taylor gets to him, he's going to have to finish really quickly. I mean, Jaden's a Mike Ironman protege and is so good at scrambling. I think Jaden has the advantage if for no other reason. He gets to rest. He gets to get his practice matches in, but he doesn't have to run through the tournament. And even though, Taylor feels like he's the number one guy at that weight, I mean, and we'll probably walk through the possible brackets, but there's a lot of good guys in all these brackets. It's not like he's just going to walk through and people are going to fall down for him. So, I would think Jaden has the advantage, but like you said, David Taylor has had an unbelievable season, and specifically, like you said, his World Cup was just absolutely off the chain.
You mentioned Jaden and Kyle Snyder going around up in Fargo, and it triggered something in my mind. My guy Brett Haas up here in Iowa, back when he went to Fargo, he drew Kyle Snyder first round, Jaden Cox second round. He got those two guys were his two matches up in Fargo.
So did the 0-2 barbecue, but he could swear. But he went home saying, "I swear, I really wrestled some good guys." Yeah.
Yeah. The worst Fargo draw of all time, without certainty, absolute certainty.
That probably literally is right with guys with Olympic medals. That's crazy. Yeah. Wow.
Yep.
That's brutal. That's absolutely brutal. Spend $1,000 and all that time to go up there, and then that happened to you. Yeah.
Hey, he's got a story to tell, though. He's got a great story to tell.
Well, if you're going to lose, right, if you're not going to place, that's almost better than taking seventh. I mean, because you can at least argue I might have been the third best guy. So, yeah. Yeah. Well, how do you think that'll go with Cox and Taylor? How do you see it going?
Yeah, I really don't know. I could see it going so many different ways. I think that, the one thing that that I look back on, and this is ancient history ago. I mean, a year ago, we're talking about, those were barn burners in the matches in the final series with Jaden Cox and Kyle Dake last year. And I think the Dake-Taylor match is 4-3, and David just hasn't been able to get over that hurdle against Kyle Dake. But that being said, he just looks like a totally different guy this year. And the same could be said for the jump that Jaden Cox has made, that he made from last April until last August. You could see like the guy just getting better every time out. It was like his confidence was growing, his skills were getting better. He was getting more in tune with, freestyle rules. And if, I think if he had been aware of the situation, he's probably in the Olympic finals last year. So,
I agree with that last statement 100%. 100%. I agree with that.
And so I think, I guess whoever comes out of this bracket, I think you got to think is a strong bet to medal in Paris. I think the United States can be well represented. Whichever one, whomever comes out of this bracket and wins in Lincoln this weekend. I'm just fascinated to watch it all. And same thing with 74 kilos, and you mentioned we're going to take a run through it. We might as well do that now and just get that going and talk about 57 kilos a little bit.
Let's just want to start down there.
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, to me, that's one of the most intriguing weights of the tournament in terms of, you got Tony Ramos and we talked about it off air. There's something to be said for that clutch gene and
yes,
his ability to come through when things get tight. I mean, the guy has found ways to win matches, and I think he was behind in every single one of his matches out in Vegas at the Open and found a way to win them all. Then you got Tyler Graff is probably on the best tear of his career right now. I think it's like 7 consecutive international tournaments that he has won. Nahshon is a guy that certainly can score takedowns on just about anybody. Just your general thoughts, David. How do you see it shaping up? Who do you think is going to be there in the end Saturday?
I'm a nerd where I like to put the brackets together. So I put the brackets together based on where guys are ranked. Now, at this weight, the one guy that is qualified who probably won't wrestle is Daniel Dennis, but as a returning Olympian, he's got a qualifying spot. So I don't have him in here. So I have Graf versus I guess the pigtail matches would be Delgado as the 8 seed versus Gilman as the 9 seed, which would be unbelievable, especially with the recent Hawkeye Wrestling Club dynamic. And the other one would be Darian Cruz as the 10 seed versus Zach Sanders as the 7. And then whoever wins those matches, Graf would get the winner of Delgado Gilman. The other part of that top bracket is Megaludis Borelli, then Tomasello against Alan Waters, and then the winner of Cruz Sanders against Nahshon Garrett. If the seeds held, the semis would be Graf Megaludis versus Tomasello Garrett, and then if the seeds held again, it would be Graf against Garrett. This weight feels like there's a lot of parity, though, right? Like if Megaludis came out, or even like an Alan Waters, right, who's really good and is probably going to be seeded 6th or 7th, if he would make the finals of the tournament, I don't think that'd be a huge surprise, right?
Yeah, yep. Yeah, this is one where it feels like there could be, any one of 6, 7, 8, 9 guys that could make the finals, and you wouldn't be floored by it, right? You wouldn't be like, how in the world did that happen?
Correct. And certain guys really match up well here, right? Like against each other. Like, Graf's really good on his top game, and so guys that struggle on bottom are hoping that he gets beat ahead of time. Megaludis had that super close match with Ramos a couple years ago where he lost on that crazy rule where it was a half shot was worth a point or something like that. He lost 1-0. So, I think, rather than just say this 8 times in a row, I think the guy sitting in the finals waiting is the favorite. But, who's going to win the bracket in this case? It's really interesting. And, Ramos has pretty good records against all of these guys, right? I mean, I think if you wanted to see something super interesting, Ramos against Thomas Gilman would be really interesting just based on what happened at the Olympic trials, and now you've got Ramos against another Iowa guy. I think that would be, and you're a guy that likes storylines, that'd probably be the best storyline for the final series at 57 kilos, right?
It'd be one of, certainly.
Yeah. So that's how the brackets seem like they would shake out at a 57. At 61, for people that don't have brackets in front of them, Logan Stieber's waiting. Looks like Kendrick Maple would be the 1 seed. Brandon Wright would be the 2. Josh Kindig the 3. Cody Brewer the 4. Jason Ness 5. Seth Gross 6. Joe Colon 7. Chris Tardanes 8. Cannon Store 9. Corey Clark, if he wrestles, would be the 10. So if those hold, and there's an argument for Joe Colon to be up as high as 5, but if he were the 7, him and Brandon Wright would be a rematch, not only from the U.S. Open semis, but from their time together, not only at Grandview, but at Iowa Central. So those are guys that know each other really well. And if the seeds hold, it'd be Maple against Dardanes in the quarters, Cody Brewer against Ness, Josh Kindig, Seth Gross, and then the Cologne Brandon Wright match. Again, if seeds held, Brandon Wright, Josh Kindig and then Maple versus Cody Brewer, and those guys wrestled at the semis of the U.S. Open and trained together at OU for years. It feels like, to me, Logan Stieber feels like he's on his own level. It feels like Maple's really on a level separate from the rest of these guys. And then it really wouldn't surprise me if anybody came out of that bottom half of the bracket, and it wouldn't surprise me if Maple wrestled really any of these other guys in the semis. The only thing that would surprise me in this bracket would be if Cody Brewer had a low-scoring match. That's really the only thing that I would be shocked to see if that happened, because that guy puts up points and gives up points.
Yeah, and you could say the same thing about Joe Colon too. I mean, he isn't in too many 1-1 criteria battles. They're going to push outs and shot clock violations and stuff like that, you're going to see some points on the board. And, I think 61 kilos has a chance to be a lot of fun just because of what you mentioned there. Kindig, Brewer, Jason Ness, Seth Gross, Joe Colon. I mean, those are guys that score a lot of points. They're not afraid to give up points because they've got confidence that they're going to score them in bunches too.
That's right. And they attack, and like you said, they don't sit on leads and they chase leads down. And, Kindig scores a ton of points too, like you said. So, and he's done really well down there at 61. He's doing a good job of managing his weight, and, he's very productive there. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Then if you go to 65 kilos, that's where Jordan Oliver's waiting. And the seeds, it looks like Frank Molinaro 1, Zane Rutherford 2, BJ Futrell 3, Kellen Russell 4, Nick Dardane 5, Mario Mason 6, Evan Henderson 7, Dean Heil 8. I don't even know if Dean Heil's wrestling in this or not. This weight for all the world feels like it's Molinaro and Rutherford in the finals. And I guess I should mention here that Jimmy Kennedy, who would be ranked very highly here, is moving up to 70 kilos. So that's why you don't hear his name here at 65, even that's where he wrestled at the U.S. Open. So do you see anybody derailing Molinaro versus Rutherford? And if not, who wins between those two?
Those guys look like, based on results and what we've seen here, it seemed like they're on a different plane than the rest of the field here. But, who wins between those two? I don't know. I think it would be a lot of fun to watch. I mean, I think that's a question, a lot of people are probably wondering. You look at where they were in the Olympic trials last year, and obviously Frank had such a tremendous day there in Iowa City and got on such a roll, and he carried that through to qualify the weight for the Olympics, and then, an eyelash away from taking home a medal from Rio, and just looked like, to me, sort of like Jaden Cox, where, as the summer progressed, you could just see the confidence building in him becoming a different wrestler. But I think that maybe lost in the shuffle a little bit, because there was so much depth at that weight class, and what was Molinaro like? Molinaro was like the 9 or 10 seed, right? Like the 9 seed, right? And comes through and lost in the shuffle a little bit was the tournament that Zane had, and he put on a heck of a performance there in Carver Hawkeye Arena, and
correct.
I certainly wouldn't dismiss him from breaking up the party and putting himself in there Saturday night in contention to make a team.
Yeah, and I think Zane took third at the Olympic trials and beat James Green right out of the gate. I know he beat James Green because it just looked like Green cut so much weight to go down there from 70 to 65. And, then you got guys like Pico that are gone. So, I mean, it really, I agree with you 100%. It feels like Molinaro and Rutherford are sort of destined to meet. And, they had to have trained together. So it'll be, student and the master and all that sort of stuff. So that'll be, I think, fascinating to watch. And then, if Jordan's going to finally make a world team, this is his chance to do it for sure. So you go to 70 kilos. James Green is waiting. Kolchitsky is the 1 seed. I think Pammy the 2. Jimmy Kennedy the 3. But there's an argument that Jimmy Kennedy could be the 1 seed, so which would obviously change the matchups. The rest of it seems to be pretty set. Nolf 4, Pantaleo 5, Chamberlain 6, Tommy Gant 7, Ness 8. And this is one where, some of the weights, there's maybe like, well, who's the 5, 6, 7? The 1, 2, 3 here is really is fluid. And then I think the seeding meeting will be interesting to argue. I think Kennedy may end up as the 1 seed, which would then put him, at the top, and then put Kolchitsky and Pammy at the bottom. It feels like those 3 guys, though, are a little bit clear of the field, and I think people would certainly be really interested to see if Nolf, just with his high volume of attacks, he scores points, but in freestyle, sometimes that high volume can actually, cost you points as well. And then Ness is so much fun to watch because he's going to try a high flyer or some crazy stuff at some point. So how do you see the weight shaking out? I
think you laid it out perfectly right there. I really do. I think your point about Nolf is spot on. Certainly, we talk about those guys that at 61 kilos that score points, and you don't want to turn away, and that's the same thing with him. And then Kolchitsky, a guy that just a fascinating story. I mean, I think the first time. It's funny that him and Dylan Ness wound up in the same weight here, because the first time I saw Nazar was right down the street from me right now, Young Arena, and Northern Plains. I think it was Northern Plains Regional was right down the street, and come in thinking that like Bart Ryder, Mac Ryder's younger brother Bart was a 4-timer in Iowa, and you got Dylan Ness in this same bracket. Everybody's talking about Ness and Ryder meeting up, and Nazar comes in and beats them both. And I think he'd only been in the United States maybe a month or two at that point, and coming over from the Ukraine, having such a terrific Division III career, and then really getting it going on the freestyle level. Had such a good tournament back in Ukraine last. I think it was December for the Club Cup Championship. So that's a guy that certainly keep an eye on. A guy that as he has more success on the senior level in the United States, more and more people are finding out about his story, and I wouldn't discount him either. Yeah,
and guys like me that follow him know that. Who knew he was, but yeah, because he didn't wrestle D1 and all that kind of stuff, he's kind of a hidden gem for sure. So I think that way it's real interesting. And James Green, I think you feel like if you're America, if someone's going to have to wrestle awfully well to beat him, and he continues to look like he's a guy that can medal. I mean, obviously he's done it before, but at the highest level. So then 74 kilos, Burroughs is obviously waiting. This weight's really fluid. After the first two, in the bracket, Dake's the 1 seed, Dieringer's the 2 seed. One way, and I have it drawn up this way, this is with Mark Hall not wrestling in the seniors because he's wrestling in the juniors. But we can walk through both scenarios. So if he doesn't wrestle, USA Wrestling has Chris Perry ranked ahead of Anthony Valencia, but Anthony Valencia placed ahead of him at the U.S. Open. So it'd be interesting to see. I have it based on rankings. According to USA Wrestling, Perry would be the 3 seed, Valencia the 4 seed, LaValle the 5 seed, Aymar the 6 seed, Marsteller the 7 seed, Vincenzo Joseph the 8 seed. That matchup gives you some really interesting, if it comes that way, because now Marsteller and Dieringer wrestle again. Aymar and Chris Perry would wrestle. Mark Perry, that's fun on which corner he sits in. And that leaves Mark Hall out of it. And I was actually talking to somebody about this today because I'm actually coaching in the juniors. I know the juniors weigh in on Thursday and wrestle Friday, and I know the weigh-ins for the seniors are on Friday. So what do you think the realistic chances that Mark Hall either wrestles in both of these or gets a special exemption where they push the final 2 out of 3 for the junior tournament, maybe to Fargo or something, so he can wrestle in the senior bracket?
I hadn't really given that much thought, but, I asked Mark about that out in Vegas. Asked him if there was any thought, if he'd given any thought to wrestling in the Open, going the senior route instead. And he said, I want to say maybe it was even Lee Pritz that he talked to that said, to chase championships, chase world titles, basically, and give yourself an opportunity to go win those things and wrestle the best guys in the world at your age division. And, but certainly something to keep an eye on, right? I mean, he's a guy that a year ago at the Olympic trials, I mean, he ran into some guys that are grown men in I think Andrew Howe.
Right.
If I'm not mistaken, he ran into him. I think, did he wrestle Adam Hall there too?
Him and Logan Massa had an epic match.
Yeah. It was so much fun to watch. And so I would love to see, the more we can see of Mark Hall, better off, right? I mean, it's a lot more fun when a guy like that is in the bracket that, can do so many so many different things at a high level. So, yeah, certainly something to keep an eye on as the week progresses.
Yeah, and I mean, and I have the week scheduled because we're traveling and stuff like that, and I mean, so I think Hall, whether he wrestles in both or whether they give him an exemption. I mean, obviously the first, it's like a decision tree. The first part of it is, does he want to wrestle in the Senior Open or Senior Trials? If he does, then there's two choices. Well, he's going to do both, or will they give him an exemption? I mean, no disrespect to anybody at that other weight, but he's the prohibitive favorite in the junior tournament, and he's sitting in the finals. So, I mean, and he just rolled guys in Vegas at that weight class. So that's fascinating. Now we get to 86 kilos, and we talked about this, but we got David Taylor. Well, okay, we got Jaden Cox waiting, and then in the bracket, Taylor's the 1 seed. Richard Perry would be the 2 seed. Nick Heflin, the 3 seed. Bo Nickel, Pat Downey, round 1 is the 4-5. Gabe Dean would be against Heflin at the 6. Austin Trotman would be the 7 against Perry. Kyle Crutchmer, 8 against Taylor, assuming he gets by Joe Rao, who's the 9. And Josh Asper would wrestle Trotman in the pigtails at the 10. I saw where Interman and some other folks had Crutchmer at 7, Trotman 8, Asper 9, Rao 10. So those, who draws out of there. But if you look at the top 6, it's pretty dead set. To me, besides the fact I think David Taylor is going to come out of the bracket, I think Nickel versus Downey, and then obviously if Downey were to win, the winner of that, either one of them against David Taylor is really fascinating to me. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, that's, the possibility for another Nickel-Downey match. And, like we've talked about in past shows, whether you like the guy or don't like him, you're going to be watching Pat Downey, no doubt. I mean, you're going to be watching him on the mat. You're going to be watching him on social media. Potential for fireworks both places. So, that's certainly a guy, and I don't know if you've seen his singlet that he's tweeted out, but he's got a pretty interesting singlet that he's had designed for the World Team Trials, the unattached assassin.
I think one of us sent that to each other. We texted a picture of that to each other. Yeah. So, I think that's fascinating.
BAMF. BAMF, it says on there. Barracudas are mean fish, David. Barracudas are mean fish.
That dude is one of a kind, good, bad, or ugly, like you're saying. He's an interesting guy to follow. So then you get to 97 kilos, and, you talked about your buddy that went 2-0 against Cox and Snyder. I think Kyvan Gadsden is going to be the answer to one of the greatest trivia questions ever when they say Kyle Snyder and Jaden Cox were in the same bracket of the NCAAs and neither one of them won it. Who did? So, and I was very good friends with Kyvan's dad, Willie, and my dad was actually the medal presenter that year. So, I mean, I've very vivid memories of that year in St. Louis. But the way it stands right now, Gadsden would be the 1 seed, Kilgore would be the 2, Micah Burak, would be the 3, Nathan Burak would be the 4. It looks like Kleinschmidt would be the 5, Ty Wall 6, Nico Reyes 7, Matt Williams 8, Hayden Zilmer 9. To me, it feels like Kyvan Gadsden's made really big strides. I don't think it's fair to say he's caught up to Snyder, but it feels like he's separated himself from the rest of the pack at this weight. And the one thing he does have is he knows he can beat Kyle Snyder in a match that counts. So I think he won't go into that match scared. I don't know that, how much that'll impact the final result, but I think you got a guy that will actually wrestle him hard. Do you see it the same way, or do you see it differently?
No, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. And, we saw Kyvan out in Vegas in last 3 rounds of the tournament, I think, or was it, he wasn't real happy with the way he wrestled in the finals, I don't think, but, 24-1 in the last 3 rounds of the tournament out there. And I'm with you. I think he's getting better and better as it goes, and certainly, that's not the, you look 1 through 10, and that's not the most decorated weight class after the first, 3 or 4 guys, but it's certainly one that if we see Gadsden and Snyder on Saturday night, I think that there's a lot of intrigue there going back to NCAA finals.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I think it's super interesting. So at heavyweight, Gwiazdowski's waiting. Zach Ray is the 1. Don Bradley is the 2. Bobby Telford's the 3. Tony Nelson's the 4. Justin Grant is the 5. Nathan Butler's the 6. Blaze Cabell is the 7. And I don't think there's really even an 8 here. I mean, Tervel, but we know he's retired. So it looks like Zach Ray would actually have a bye into the semis. It feels to me like it's Zach Ray against Bradley, against Dom, and then the winner against Gwiz. Gwiz has obviously got the huge advantage because he gets to wait all day. But when he won at the U.S. Open, I think that was the first time he'd ever beaten Ray. And Dom Bradley's wrestled all these guys. I mean, he was up, I think, 4-0 on Gwiz at the semis of the Open, and he's either beaten Ray or been ahead of him in matches numerous times. I mean, this feels like a weight, even though Gwiz is the favorite and Ray's, done really well against these guys. I think Bradley has cause for confidence here if he can, wrestle a full 6 minutes against these guys. This weight feels pretty even to me. How do you see it?
Well, I see it a lot like 57 kilos, right? The bookends are to me, in terms of the most suspense, where you look on paper and you could see 2-3 guys that make sense of potentially coming out and grabbing that spot. Those are the 2, I think, 57 and 125. So I'm with you. I'm interested to see, certainly we're going to have a changing of the guard there. I mean, it's been Tervel's weight for so long, and
right.
Is Gwiz is he ready to step up and be that guy like Tervel, be the representative for multi-years and put a lock on this weight class in the United States for this cycle? I think that he's a guy that can go get takedowns, and to me, you look at the best heavyweights on the planet, and they're guys that can go get takedowns.
Yes.
And not just have to rely on standing in the center and hoping to get calls to go their way or get push outs and things like that. Gwiz is a guy that's got some high powered offense and he can go get points.
Yeah, he can go get the legs. That's a phrase I hear with a lot of these top level coaches. He can go get the legs when he needs to, and that's the game at every weight. But if you can do that at 125, that's a big advantage. 125 kilos, yeah. So I think it's going to be really fun. I mean, this is first time I've gone up there in any sort of capacity with track, so I'm interested to see how that goes. And we're actually coaching a couple of St. Louis guys in the junior trials on Friday, so that'll be really fun too. So it'll be a really that weekend will be fascinating.
Well, while all this is going on, we've got a couple events going this week on track wrestling. Pan Am Juniors. United States sending a team down there led by Anthony Cassiope, Fargo finalist, guy that won Folk Style Nationals heavyweight out of Illinois. And then Schoolboy duels will be going on this week. And David, I was looking at some of the past Schoolboy results, and it's staggering some of the names that are in this tournament. I looked at 2010, and these are just the placement duels. Some of the names that were in 2010, Vincenzo Joseph, Michael Kemmerer, Josh Maruka, I think those 3 wrestled 3 out of 4 weights in a row for Team PA. Chandler Rogers was in the championship duel for Washington. Mitch McKee, Keyshawn Hayes, Cam Sikora, Seth Gross, Miles Martin, Stevan Micic, Matthew Kaladzik. That's just 2010. You go back to 2005, Nico Megaludis, Taylor Walsh, Josh Kindig, the Alton twins, Mike Evans, Kyle Dake, Cody Brewer, Alan Waters, Ryan Mango, Kendrick Maple. Just a small sample of the kids that are going to be wrestling in that. So
that's awesome.
Pretty incredible to look and see, such familiar names that, we're talking 12 years ago for Megaludis and Dake and company, but, we're only 7 years out for guys like Vincenzo Joseph and Michael Kemmerer and guys like that. So these guys are going to be competing at Schoolboy duels. They're going to be on our radar here in a hurry. So chance to watch those guys compete and get to know them before the rest of the country does here.
The superstars of tomorrow, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And, we talked at the top, a couple high-profile guys on the move. Corey Keener had been rumored for weeks that he was going to transfer to Penn State, Central Michigan to Penn State. So Penn State addresses 133 pounds. I saw somebody on Twitter the other night, said something about Penn State solves one of its problems or something along those lines. And I'm thinking Penn State doesn't have a whole lot of problems. But
they got five national champs and a guy that would have been ranked the number 2 seed in the country at 6 of the weights and returning All-American at another weight. So, they don't have a lot of problems, is right.
Yep. So, anyway, Isaiah White, that's a heck of a get for Nebraska, the D2 champ from Notre Dame College, making a move to Lincoln, where they have a chance to roll around with Tyler Berger, Jordan Burroughs, James Green and company. Pretty good situation for him, and a heck of a get for Nebraska as well. And that, you start looking at the pieces that Mark Manning and company are putting into place out there. We talked about Alex Thompson a couple weeks back, undefeated 3-timer from Iowa, Fargo cadet finalist, committed to the Huskers here earlier this month. Chad Redd, Jason Renneria, Bo Bresky, some pieces really starting to fit together there for the Huskers.
People forget how good Isaiah White was coming out of high school. I'm not saying he's not good now, but they just don't remember because he won one of the most loaded Fargo brackets and beat Vincenzo in the finals. Kemmerer was in that weight. I know Isaiah because I'm friends with Mike Powell, who's coach at Oak Park River Forest. And Isaiah was the number 1 guy in the country at his weight. I think he might have lost like a long overtime match with David McFadden, but he's the truth. I mean, obviously he hasn't had the same kind of guys to roll around with at Notre Dame that Vincenzo Joseph had at Penn State. So there may have been a gain there or a fallback, depending on which perspective you're looking at. But there's absolutely no doubt that Isaiah White makes Nebraska, super legitimate there. And it's interesting because he had originally committed to Ohio State coming out. And, the thought was, we'll send him to Notre Dame and he'll be close. He'll be in Ohio, get in-state residency and all that stuff. So it's interesting to see what happened. Probably the transfer of Tishan Campbell made that change that up a little bit. So that's a big get for Nebraska. It's kind of sliding by. I don't think people are giving it enough of the publicity because they get him with 3 years plus a redshirt year. So I think he's a major get for them, and his training partners, like you said, at that weight class, you can't argue that it'd be hard to argue that there's many more situations in the country that are much better than that, for sure.
Well, we talk about a couple wrestlers on the move. We got a couple wrestling programs on the move. SIU Edwardsville leaving the SoCon, heading to the MAC, and that'll be effective a year from now. Northern Iowa making the jump from the MAC to the Big 12, and that's going to be effective immediately. Still some ends to tie up on that deal, but it sounds like it is just a matter of time before that is a done deal. One of the things that's going to be interesting to see how Northern Iowa fills out that schedule for the rest of this season. I mean, I think the Panthers are running into some scheduling issues there, trying to get that thing filled up. But when you look beyond the short term and the battles with just getting a schedule put together, what do you think about these moves for Northern Iowa, for SIU Edwardsville?
Well, I think SIU to the MAC kind of makes sense. I mean, I think geographically they're just as close to those schools as they are to the SoCon. I know Jeremy Spates still has a great working relationship with Brian Smith. So I know if that was something they wanted, I'm sure Brian, did what he could to help that with Mizzou being in the MAC. And I remember when Mizzou was going to leave the Big 12, I actually talked to Coach Smith, and he's like, I got something up my sleeve. We're going to have a place to go. And that, and it was the MAC. So, I think Brian and Jeremy are both guys that think ahead. I think you and I are both very high on UNI next year. And I think seeing, you're right, the dual scheduling and all that stuff's going to be tough, but they don't all wrestle everybody in that conference anyway because there's a bunch of add-ins and they're taking a couple of years to get that worked out. I think it's cool seeing, those guys we talked about their lineup last week and really in depth a couple of weeks ago when we were doing the top 20 review. But like the Max Thompsons of the world being in the firestorm there. I mean, 149 was really good in the MAC last year, but the Big 12s are cool. And I literally a few hours ago interviewed Kevin Crutchmer, who is the Oklahoma USA chairman and who runs the Big 12s down there, and Kyle's dad, obviously. And I think, they had 12,000 people through the turnstiles for the 2 days there. That meet felt a lot like a preview to the NCAAs. It's good for the Big 12, and the Big 12 for years was the preeminent conference, and then it, kind of fell in hard times. I think it's cool to see UNI in there. I mean, I'm excited about both of those moves.
Well, look where they were 3 years ago, where Oklahoma's down, Iowa State's down, West Virginia's down. It's Oklahoma State, and pretty much that's it. Not really a lot of suspense from a team standpoint, but now you've got Iowa State investing a lot of money into wrestling, a lot of resources into wrestling. Oklahoma doing the same thing. Northern Iowa coming into this conference. We've talked at length about South Dakota State and the job that Chris Bono, John Reeder, AJ Shop and company are doing up there. And you got some more programs, Northern Colorado. You look a little bit further down. Northern Colorado is having, I think, they have 5 qualifiers last year. I think a program high. Wyoming had such a good tournament out in Vegas. It's becoming I don't want to say that they're on par with the best conferences out there. I don't want to say they're quite there where the Big Ten is yet. But the Big 12 has made huge strides here. With the addition of bringing in the Western Wrestling Conference programs, adding Northern Iowa to the group, and then seeing the resurgence of, at least we think that there's going to be a resurgence in Ames and in Norman as well. Oklahoma certainly took some big steps this past year, especially on short time that Lou Roselli had to put together a recruiting class. But you could see the progress that program made throughout the season. So I think exciting times for Big 12 wrestling coming in the future. I think, it's going to probably help Oklahoma State as well. It's going to keep Oklahoma State develop an edge for them as well. Just having to be on top of their game all the time now. So it'll be pretty cool. There's going to be a lot of high-profile dual meets in that conference coming in the next several years.
It wasn't good at one point that was a 4-team conference, and they're trying to stretch that thing out over a full day. And, anybody who's watching it knows you could run this thing like a quad, basically, right? And, you run the semis, you run the first and the thirds, and then if there's any true seconds, you wrestle them. And you couldn't really – nobody got excited about it. It wasn't – you're almost in a tournament. That's why you're just hoping guys don't get hurt, which is a terrible way to be looking at things. And, it feels like a real national tournament qualifier now. They held it in a big arena. They blacked out half of it, so it felt really full. It sounded really full. OU and OSU fans really showed out well there. And I talked to the guys from Oklahoma State, the coaches, and they were happy that it's bigger. They're happy that the Big 12 is tougher. They absolutely killed everybody in that tournament. They had a record-setting performance. I think they went 28-2 or something crazy like that and lost the 2 matches by a total of 3 or 4 points. So they're going to continue to raise their game, but it is good. It's really good when those conferences are deeper like that, and it almost feels like this maybe some super conferences, or where you could see some of these conferences, blending off and doing it that way. And with the gold and silver qualification things, it's less important, right? I mean, the best guys are making it to the tournament for the most part. We talked about that a lot in season last year. So it allows you to make these moves with conferences and it be better. And you and I had All-American last year, All-Americans, and SIU finally had an All-American. So I think it's a good move for wrestling all around.
Well, if you've been following the show the last 4 weeks, we've broken down 2 weight classes per week, and we're finally to the end, 197 and heavyweight. David, let's take a dive into those. You have your list up in front of you?
I do. All the color codings that you're so familiar with, yeah. So 197 is a weight that feels like it's not as deep as the first 8 we've talked about. There's 4 returning All-Americans: Colin Moore, Jared Haught, Preston Weigel, Kevin Beasley. What's interesting to note there is Beasley will score points in the preseason rankings for Michigan and not for Old Dominion. Then from the round of 12, Matt McCutcheon, Cash Wilkie, Dan Shade. Round of 16, Frank Matias, Matt Williams, who we just mentioned in the trials, Steven Cervantes, and then the round of 24, Nate Roeder, Corey Grigo, Ricky Robertson, Ben Honus. Although I think we both feel like maybe Darmstadt will be there. Christian Brunner and Jarek Kasunik. And then the round of 32 guys, Tom Slay, Jacob Holschlag, Malik McDonald, Tanner Orndorff, Marcus Harrington. So that's 21 deep. And then you've got some freshman guys like Nathan Traxler from Stanford, Sammy Colbray from Iowa State, Ben Darmstadt from Cornell, Eric Schultz, big stud at Nebraska, AJ Nevels, Fresno State, Kevin Mulligan, Rutgers, Blake Ripple from Indiana. And then, who knows if Kassar will be back at Penn State. Oklahoma State's really deep at that weight. They have Derek White, although I'm hearing rumblings they may move him up to heavyweight. So, I mean, it's a good weight, but I certainly feel like it's not nearly as deep as some of the other ones we've talked about the last month or so. What jumps out to you when you hear these names and we're going down the list?
Well, I totally agree with you in that standpoint. I think, we've certainly given a lot of given a rundown on the first 8 and looking at some of the others. 41, for example, 65. Those 2 popped in my mind right away. Just certainly a lot more depth, a lot more high end stuff. 1 through 8 at those other weights. So here you're looking at a weight class where some teams can really make some hay. I mean, we talked about it a year ago. Well, not a year ago, but midway through the year, I remember saying Cash Wilkie, and he was sitting right outside the top 25. He'd gone really close with a lot of guys that were in the 10 to 25 range, and I thought just because of the weight class and people not really separating themselves, the top 8 hadn't really separated themselves, that I felt like he was a guy that could, really get hot at the end and make a run. And, he wound up making the round of 12. He wasn't even in the tournament when the initial pairings were out, and, ended up getting in as an alternate and making the round of 12. We talked about Holschlag a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
Maybe last week, a guy that at the start of the year was in contention to become Northern Iowa's starter at 84, lost that spot to Drew Foster and winds up having a pretty good season. Undersized, but certainly posted some good victories along the way, and we talked about the benefit of him having 4, 5, 6 months in the off season to really build his body up. One guy we haven't mentioned this week in running down, but you talked about it a week ago, Willie Miklas, the possibility of him making the move up from 84 to 97. Certainly has the frame to do that. 2-time All-American. If he indeed makes that jump from 84 to 97, I think you're looking at a guy that can contend for a high spot on that podium.
Yeah, I would probably have him ranked 3rd. being a two-time All-American. And, I think, my man crush I have on Colin Moore and how he wrestles, but this feels like a weight where Ohio State can score a lot of points. You were dead on the nuts accurate about Wilkie months ahead of time. And the interesting thing is, when we had Terry Brands on Matt Chat, I think there's a good chance that Wilkie goes to 84 and Holloway comes back to 97. I mean, you obviously have your finger on the pulse of Iowa way better than I do, but that seems like that could happen. It might make sense for them with Sammy Brooks graduating. So, it's interesting because if they think Holloway's as good as Wilkie, then they're putting in a guy who's, would be ranked around 6th or 7th in the preseason. And then you take a round of 12 guy who is wrestling up a weight, moving down to 84, where they've had success with Brooks the last couple of years. Maybe Iowa's not quite as thin as everybody kind of thinks they are.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how 84, 97 and heavyweight shake out for the Hawkeyes because, you got the uncertainty of Sam Stoll coming off 2 ACL tears, big body. I've heard that reports out of Iowa City sound like he's really coming along well, getting in great shape. And so that would certainly give them the flexibility to look at Holloway making the cut down to 97. A guy that won a couple state titles at Mediapolis High School and had some matches, in the postseason. I remember the Dream Team Classic where I think he wrestled Bobby Stevenson, if I'm not mistaken. Bobby Stevenson, I think, was ranked number 1. I'd have to go back and look to make sure, but Holloway was right in that match, and a guy that made himself a lot of money. It feels to me like he made himself a lot of money at the end of the recruiting process, but with the way that he wrestled that spring, a late signee. But for whatever reason, it seems like hasn't quite shown the same results at heavyweight that he did when he was wrestling at a lighter weight in high school. And so maybe he's better off getting slimmed down and being down at 97.
I agree. I think that if they can do that, they've got those 3 guys that are potentially medalists at 84, 97 heavy. And then, you've got Sorensen and you've got Kemmer and then, you've got Marinelli. I mean, most people would kill to have a team like Iowa, and this is their down year. So, it's interesting. So if you go to heavyweight, there's 4 returning All-Americans from this year. Kyle Snyder was first. Obviously, Tanner Hall was third. Nick Nevels was 5th. Jacob Casper was 6th. Then you have Adam Kuhn, who was third a year ago and redshirted. Amar Desi, who was 5th a year ago and was injured. From the round of 12, you have Ryan Solomon from Pitt. Yusuf Hamida from Maryland, Conan Jennings from Northwestern. Then round of 16 this year, Thomas Haynes, Lock Haven, Cody Crawford, Oregon State, and from Campbell. Then Mike Hughes was round of 16 a year ago. He redshirted this last year. He placed in the Southern Scuffle. Then round of 24 guys, Nathan Butler, Stanford, Billy Miller, Edinburgh, who had some good wins. Garrett Ryan, Columbia, Dustin Dennison, Utah Valley, who had a couple good wins. Newton Smirchik, Central Michigan. Round of 32 guys, Joe Goodhart, Drexel, Gage Hutchison, Eastern Michigan. Jake Gunning, Buffalo, Austin Myers, Mizzou, Corey Gillen, Daniel, UNC. Then Brooks Black, who we know is good, who didn't qualify this year, but was, I think, a round of 12 guy, a round of 16 guy a year ago. Then you've got some guys coming out of redshirt. And you've talked about a couple of these guys, Jordan Wood from Lehigh, who made the finals of the Midlands, Carter Isley, I know you're high on him from UNI, Sam Stoll, we just talked about him, Gannon Gremmel from Iowa State, who I know won Fargo, Andrew Dunn, Virginia Tech, and then NC State's got 2 good heavyweights in either Michael Boykin or Mike Rogers. To me, it feels like this is probably, Snyder and Snyder's obviously at his own world level, and then it feels like Adam Kuhn probably is next best. But what kind of jumps out to you when you look at this?
Well, I think the guys at the bottom of the list are really intriguing. Brooks Black, it hasn't happened for him yet at this point in his career, but a tough year that he had this past season. But that's a guy that has a pretty lengthy track record going back to high school, being the number 1 guy in the country, pretty highly coveted. So interesting to see how he can bounce back. Mike Hughes, guy that gets on top and scores a ton of points. Had a pretty good season as a redshirt this year. You mentioned Jordan Wood, and we saw a glimpse of him at the Midlands. Isley went 23-7. Going back to high school, I don't know how many thousand yards he rushed for, but imagine a guy that's 270 pounds that's running, pretty good athlete like that, and trying to tackle him as a running back. It was quite a chore for high school football players here in Iowa. But Sean Streck, another guy that had some opportunities in football and pretty highly coveted as well. So there's a lot of guys at the bottom of the list that I'm intrigued to see, because there's going to be one or two guys in that list that aren't listed in the top 24 there that I think are going to be serious contenders to make the podium. You also have Stoll, as I mentioned, coming back off a couple ACLs. Be interesting to see how he holds up. So certainly lots to keep an eye on there. Snyder, certainly the class of the field. Adam Kuhn coming back, Desi coming back. That adds to it. And then Jacob Casper, he talked a lot of talk leading up to the semifinals, and he really hasn't backed down even after losing by major decision to Kyle Snyder. So, he's got people talking. He's got people like Pat Downey. We talked about his social media accounts. People are going to keep an eye on what Jacob Casper's doing and saying. So, lots to look at here from heavyweight. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be a fun weight class. Maybe not so much suspense at the top end with Snyder separating himself from the field, but I think 2 through 25, there's going to be a lot of movement here throughout the season.
And it feels like a lot of these the kids at this weight, the guys at this weight, these are guys where their schools, we've talked about, are on the move. Like Arizona State's a school that we think can make a big jump. Michigan's a school that is a state that we think can make a big jump. Iowa's a school that we know they're going to do everything they can to not have a fall. And obviously Penn State, if they get a third, we have Neville's ranked third here. Even if he was ranked fourth, if we bump Kuhn up. But if you have Tanner Hall and Kuhn ranked, 2, 3, somewhere in there, those guys, that's huge points. Tanner Hall scored a ton of points for Arizona State this year as like the 10 or 11 or 9 seed, something like that. And, Kuhn, we've talked about how good Michigan and Arizona State can be. Kuhn was the leader of that team the year he made the finals. So, those are big things. And you've talked about the work that, Kevin Dresser's doing at Iowa State, and Kevin Jackson didn't leave the cupboard bare. And Gremmel's just another one of those guys that, has great credentials and like you said, is one of those guys in that bottom half that could make a leap.
Hey, one more thing while we're on this. We're wrapping up the 10 weight classes. We had a tweet, or I got a tweet the other day. Dan Seifring, I believe is how you pronounce his name. Apologies to Dan if I mispronounced your last name. But Dan tweeted at me the other day and said he's listened to the podcast about 174 and noticed Fox Baldwin is not listed on the Virginia roster for 2017-2018. So thank you to Dan for pointing that out. If you guys have any feedback that you want to fire our way, anything you want us to talk about, any questions you have, feel free to give us a shout either on the Track Wrestling Twitter account or on my own personally, Andy_Hamilton, or you can hit either one of us up on Facebook. But certainly we appreciate the feedback. I want to make sure that we're getting it right out there. So thanks to Dan for pointing that out to us. I certainly hadn't noticed that, but appreciate Dan bringing that to our attention. And David, anything else for this week?
No, I got Cody Bickley that's going to be on Matt Chat this week, and he's the USA Wrestling Director of High Performance Coaching. We had him on. He's the expert on RTCs, regional training centers, what you can do and what you can't do. And There's been a lot of speculation, and he is a very high-energy guy, very high energy, and very competent, very well-spoken. Did a great job of explaining things that, people don't necessarily know, including myself, and did a great job of talking about, the benefits of RTCs and how that's actually resulted in tremendous improvement at age group levels in terms of world medals. So a guy that I was not friends with before this process, but a guy that I'm very impressed with, very grateful that he came on. And he's a very good listen. I think Gary Mayab is up there this week and will be, till the end of the week. They both were awesome. So, and then I'm going to try to do something a little different for the next couple episodes of Matt Chat. I'm going to try to get all 8 World Team Trial winners on for like 15 minutes apiece and, put them together in 2-hour-long podcasts. If I can do that, I think those are the guys that people would really love to hear in the next coming weeks.
Well, that does it for this week's edition of Weighing In with Andy Hamilton and David Mirikitani. David Mirikitani, thank you so much for your time.
Always my pleasure, Andy.
And we'll be back next week. In the meantime, you can check back to trackwrestling.com for coverage of the World Team Trials. We got preview stories up right now of Jordan Burroughs and Kyle Dake, David Taylor and Jaden Cox. There's going to be more to come this week. We got the Blue Chip Recruiting podcast with Eric Olenowski, his guest. This week, 2-time Cadet World Champion Yanni Diakomahalis, Cornell bound. He talks about some of the things that led him to Cornell. Also, David's Matt Chat, as he mentioned. We're going to have the Schoolboy National Duels. We're going to have the Pan Am Junior World Championships, so you can catch all that on trackwrestling.com. Thanks for listening.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.